son, who, while we were in office, visited down the street, would go to a strip joint, like ended up impregnating strippers. I mean, this is absolutely inexcusable. And that is not the politics that I ever worked for, working for Barack Obama. And I think Lady Liberty deserves better than both Joe Biden and Donald Trump. And it makes me very sad to see this.
First then, Joe Biden. He always said he wouldn't pardon Hunter Biden.
I am satisfied that I'm not going to do anything. I said I abide by the jury decision, and I will do that, and I will not pardon him.
Now, though, Joe Biden's written and signed an official pardon, who has basically given that pardon to his son before he could face criminal charges and possible jail. In the last hour, Joe Biden's press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, addressed the president's decision.
I would encourage everyone to read in full the president's statement. I think he lays out his thought process. He lays out how he came to this decision. He came to this decision this weekend. So let's be very clear about that. He says it himself. It's in his voice. He said he came to this decision this weekend. And he said he wrestled with this. And because he believes in the justice system, but he also believes that the war politics infected the process and led to a miscarriage of justice.
That's Joe Biden's press secretary speaking just in the last hour. Let's welcome to the program Bob Mulholland, who's a Democratic Party strategist and a longtime friend of the Biden family. Bob, welcome to the show.
Good evening.
Evening to you. We're also joined by Johanna Maska, who served as President Obama's White House Director of Press. Hello to you, Johanna.
It's great to be here.
It's good to have you here. Thank you, Johanna. Bob, can I come to you first? Well, you heard there Lindy Lee really condemning this pardon, suggesting it was worse, as she put it, than Gerald Ford's pardon to Richard Nixon. What do you say?
Well, it was the right thing to do. Obviously, President Biden post-election saw Trump possibly as president and talking about going after his political enemies. I mean, if I was President Biden, I would not want my son Hunter under Trump in a solitary confinement. But more importantly, even Lindsey Graham, the Republican from South Carolina, said if his name was not Hunter, he would have never even been prosecuted. A year ago, there was an agreement between the Justice Department and the Hunter Biden legal team, and then the Republicans in Congress started screaming it's unfair, and so it unraveled. So then they went back to square one, and that's where we are today. But Trump himself, I predict, in his fourth year, if he makes it of his next term, will probably pardon himself for any future indictment, because remember, under federal policy, Trump, anybody who wants to file a charge against him has to wait now until he gets out of the White House. So I think the American people know that our founders gave this power to presidents, not because it was always the right thing to do, but it was the power of a president to checkmate the system. And I think President Biden made the right decision.
Okay, well, so you believe that he was protecting his son from, well, what was at least in part a political attack and from a future possible political attack. Johanna Maska, what do you think?
Look, I'm sitting under a Change We Can Believe In sign that I worked for with President Obama. And the reason I worked for President Obama was because I believed that we needed a better politics. Bill Clinton had pardoned his half-brother. I said of Trump, when Trump was in office, I see the Bill Clintonization of Donald Trump. Donald Trump, of course, pardoned his Charles Kushner, his son-in-law's father, who is now going to be ambassador to France. This is a problem with politics when we're pardoning our own family members for crimes that they committed. And yes, you could say that Hunter Biden was being charged. We didn't actually know what he was going to get in terms of a sentence, but he has proactively gone out and apologized on behalf of Democrats for his son, who, while we were in office, visited down the street, would go to a strip joint, ended up impregnating strippers. I mean, this is absolutely inexcusable. And that is not the politics that I ever worked for, working for Barack Obama. And I think Lady Liberty deserves better than both Joe Biden and Donald Trump, and it makes me very sad to see this.
So, I mean, Bob Mulholland, you heard that loud and clear. The argument that Joe Biden has helped to debase American politics. Can you address that?
Well, I think the chaos of the next 4 years will override any image of today's or this decision. And remember, the founders, in their wisdom, created a system of 3 different branches because they didn't trust either of the branches. And they also, when they come up with the power of giving the president the power to pardon, they didn't put in some sentence that says you cannot pardon friends, you cannot pardon family members. No, it was a very broad policy, only dealing with federal crimes. A president cannot give a pardon to somebody convicted of a state crime. So I think there'll be everybody saying, "Oh, this is wrong, this is right," and the other speaker was right about Trump. I mean, even Trump, besides Steve Bannon and his father-in-law or his son-in-law's father, who was convicted of tax evasion, hiring a prostitute to secretly videotape his sister's husband so then he can use against them, is outrageous. But as she said, he's going to be the ambassador to Paris. I think that's a far worse issue. And of course, Paul Manafort, who was campaign manager for Trump in 2016, he took about $12 million from corrupt sources in Ukraine. All kinds of tax evasion, all kinds of crimes. And Trump pardoned him. And I think Paul Manafort got back into the Trump campaign this year. So pardons, and older President Bush pardoned a guy, a very wealthy Pakistani whose son was in federal prison for illegally transporting drugs. And Bush pardoned him.
Okay, but Bob Mulholland, I don't think anyone's doubting the constitutional legitimacy of the power of pardon that's being exercised in this case, but it is already clear that President-elect Trump means to use this pardon as to give a certain kind of political cover to pardons that seem likely to come, including involving those January the 6th rioters, insurrectionists, and so on. I mean, does that not concern you?
Oh, yes. And unfortunately, the American people, not 50%, but decided they wanted Trump in. And every time I heard Trump say he's going to pardon the guys convicted of the January 6th, 2021, I was in the military. I was a military police officer, paratrooper. Those people that were beaten up in the Capitol were police officers. And 5 or 6 of them died within a few days, sometimes heart attack, stress, etc. So Trump has promised the American people that he would pardon the people that beat up police officers. I don't think the Republican Party can claim they're the law enforcement party, but that's the system we have, and we have to move forward.
What do you say to that, Johanna?
I think if Democrats do this but Trump thing for the next 4 years, we're losing. I think we need to have morals and we need to stand for things. And, when it comes to Joe Biden, it's a disappointment. Throughout this term, I mean, many of us who worked with President Obama supported President Biden. But from the moment that he decided to run again in his 80s, he has made bad decisions that is going to cost America because we're going to end up with Donald Trump for 4 years. We've got to have moral clarity. And I hope that those of us who are the future of the Democratic Party can stand for our values and stand against pardons for family members when they violated the law.
Joanna, we have this in from one of our listeners, Ian, who says, look, Trump pardoned 143 people in his presidency, most were friends and close associates. This is ridiculous bias, he says. Hunter was a drug addict and an idiot, but if he'd been Joe Smith, he'd never have been prosecuted to the same extent and would unlikely have seen jail time. Joanna, what do you say to our listener?
I mean, just the amount of taxes that he didn't pay. I hope we do prosecute people who violate the law. I just don't think that it's an excuse to say, but Trump, and then, Hunter didn't really do that bad of things. Hunter did all sorts of bad things. And I owe Hunter Biden nothing. I mean, I'm sorry, but we worked for Barack Obama, who had morals. His dad got to work with President Obama and got that shine. And I'm sorry, but we were the ones who gave him that shine because he lost to President Obama. And it is really sad for Biden's legacy that this is how he's going out. He promised that he wasn't going to do this. And even Sean Spicer, when we were together in Arizona, said he thought that Donald Trump was going to pardon Hunter Biden. Had that happened, I wouldn't have liked it, but it would have fit the moral character of Donald Trump. And here you've got Joe Biden going out on this. I just think it's sad for Democrats.
All right, Bob Mulholland. Our listener David has written in, who says it comes down to this: who cares? It's only as expected. And that's as may be. And you make the point that Donald Trump came into office promising pardons for various people. You mentioned some of those likely recipients of pardons yourself. But Joe Biden has now exposed himself to a very similar kind of charge. As I say, maybe there'll be those who say he's debased whatever trust there was in the American system. Do you acknowledge that as a concern, Bob?
I think the American people are used to these kind of stories.
But does that make it any better, Bob? If people are used to it, that's a certain amount of cynicism, isn't it? Are you arguing in favor of cynicism?
Well, I'm just telling you, look, I've been in politics for over 50 years after my time in Vietnam. Politics is a place where a lot of decisions are made that half the country doesn't like. We're not working in a monastery or convent. We're working in politics. And you got to make tough decisions.
Yeah.
And this president is going to go down in history as a great president because we, unlike Europe, we avoided a recession and we got this country going.
Sure,
again.
Bob, but you haven't just upset your opponents here on the Republican side, the MAGA supporters of Donald Trump. You've upset people on your own side.
Well, that goes with the turf, but I don't think. Look, we lost the presidential election to a guy who most Americans don't like, and we on our side, Democrats ran a lousy campaign. Should have closed the border 4 years ago, and we gave that opportunity to Trump. But let's look at history. Some presidents start out like Bill Clinton in '92 when he got elected, barely got elected by the pundits, and then became a great president. Other presidents have done well, and then history tears them up. Other presidents don't do well, and history, like Truman in 48 to 52, didn't do well, but history says he was a great president. So I'm looking long term.
Well, Johanna Maska, look long term, says Bob.
I don't think we need to settle for immorality. And I think if we're looking long term, the Democrats' salvation will be when we actually stand for the values that we say that we stand for. Respect and power include. Be inclusive. Make sure that we are figuring out what the issues are for the American people, but we absolutely should not stand for breaking the law and getting away with it.
All right, Johanna, thank you. Johanna Maska, and thanks to Bob Mulholland.
Well, Jess Ehrlich is a Democrat strategist, and she joins me now. Evening, Jess.
Hi.
As a father who's lost 2 of his 3 children already, is this fair enough from Joe Biden?
I mean, I don't think it really comes as that much of a surprise that he pardoned his son, particularly given the atmosphere that we've seen in general and the distrust within the United States, which I think we saw from voters who voted for President Trump this time around in terms of our institutions, particularly in terms of the judicial system and our legal system being used sort of as a way for retribution for political means. So I really don't think this should come as that much of a surprise. It's certainly something that we've seen from previous presidents pardoning family members or large donors. It's usually what happens at the end of a presidential term.
But it shouldn't just be a legal free-for-all, kind of get out of jail free-for-all, should it? And Joe Biden explicitly said that he wouldn't get involved in the case during the election period. So do we put him down as a bit of a hypocrite?
Well, I think, at this point, he feels very much isolated. I think he feels very much that not only did the party not support him in terms of, going against him running, as you just heard, even in that clip, people wanted him out of the race. as well as some of the appointments that President Trump has put forward, whether it be for Attorney General, for the FBI, all of these things. I think he feels very much that, there's nobody really who has his back and that there's a lot of retribution and things going around. And so he's naturally protecting his son.
I mean, you say naturally protecting his son. He doesn't have to do this. I mean, he did also sort of lay into to the judicial system, didn't he? Which is something that we're more used to hearing from the incoming president rather than the outgoing president. I just wonder whether this doesn't look a bit unedifying as he exits office. Surely it's all about him and his legacy and being an upstanding individual.
I mean, I think that's sort of been the outcry at this point. There's also people talking about the nature of presidential pardons. Is this something that, every time there's been a presidential pardon, I mean, in my entire lifetime, and it goes back obviously before that, people have outcries against the people who are pardoned. There was even back, with Nixon, they were like, will Nixon get a pardon going forward from Gerald Ford? I mean, all of these things happen every single time. It's the nature of presidential pardons, which is a constitutional right of the presidency. Will those things be changed? Is this something where we'll see that going forward? I don't know. I think it's, more than Congress wants to tackle at this point. But I think there's a larger issue when you're looking at the sociology and the political sort of science nature of what's going on in the United States, that, we've heard President Trump say this over and over in terms of the distrust, the deep state, all of these things, the politicization and weaponization of our judiciary, of the Department of Justice, all of these things. And I think it's on both sides. I think we've seen this now, that's what you're seeing from President Biden. We've heard it from President Trump. I think it's been an issue that was on voters' minds. And, it's certainly something now that needs to be resolved, because one of the main three pillars of our democracy is the judiciary system, the belief in, that justice is blind. And certainly we've seen from our leaders right now that they don't feel that way, whether it's Joe Biden or President Trump.
So Hunter Biden was likely to face about 3 years in jail for his two convictions, one for lying to acquire a gun and the other for tax evasion. And it has given President-elect Trump kind of an open goal, really, and said, well, if you're going to do that for your son, what about all the Jan 6 hostages, as he refers to them as? Does the pardon given to Joe, by Joe to Hunter, include the J6 hostages? I mean, presumably Trump can pardon them as soon as he comes into office. He's just trying to make a point on here, isn't he?
Yes. And he's, he pardoned members of his family before, also, like we've saw with Jared Kushner's father, who also had a tax evasion charge and is now, up for the ambassador to France from the United States. I mean, this is not anything new, I think, whether it's President Trump or to President Biden. It's just an issue that, given all the issues around Hunter Biden, there were so many deals that were made, all of these things. Part of this, pardon in particular deals with things going forward. It's not just sort of a retroactive pardon. So I think that is part of the larger issue, given who we are seeing now coming, that, we discussed about the cabinet picks for President Trump back when, we were together a few weeks ago, and we're seeing more and more of that. I think definitely we're going to be seeing, if Pam Bondi becomes the Attorney General, a very active, whether it's a change in the FBI with Kash Patel, whether it's a change in the Department of Justice and how they pursue cases. Certainly, we see a Republican majority in the House and Senate. There are things that they are going to continue, I think, to pursue. And I think that's what President Biden's concern was here, is that there would be digging into larger other issues that they've been talking about, whether it's going back to Burisma or all these different things over the years.
Look, thanks for speaking to us, Jess. Always appreciated. Jess Ehrlich there is a Democrat strategist.